Good evening from New York. Finally, from the great undulating blob of oil in the Gulf of Mexico tonight, a glimmer. The removal of a large deposit of gunk, part of a years-long buildup, specifically the retirement of a government regulator whose previous failures are estimated to have cost the taxpayers $10 billion. The other good news in our fifth story tonight, BP succeeding in getting a mile-long pipe into the gushing hole. BP now pumping the oil to a collection ship on the surface at a rate of 1,000 barrels a day. Nearly 2% of the estimated best-case scenario that the spill is gushing at least 50,000 barrels a day. A research ship this weekend reporting an unknown number of oil plumes far beneath the surface, one estimated at 10 miles long, 3 miles wide, and 300 feet thick. Computer models estimating that oil is already in or about to be in the current known as the Loop, which would take it to the Florida Keys and more of the Atlantic coast. In testimony today, Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano defended the administration's response to the spill, saying chemical dispersants have been approved to break up the plumes.
The EPA has approved the undersea use of dispersants, and as I mentioned in my statement, this is very novel. It's being done in a very controlled way because every time we do something like that, you have to explore the kind of the environmental trade-offs that are being made. But EPA has a very rigorous protocol for how that will be done and the continuous monitoring that will happen.
This as Louisiana officials complain the administration ignored their questions about the dispersants and those trade-offs. 436,000 gallons of dispersants already dumped into the Gulf, another 800,000 on order. It's the same dispersant used on the Valdez spill, after which cleanup workers reported health problems, including liver and kidney disorders. The dispersant, Corexit, sold by a company whose board includes members of Exxon's board and BP. The environmental news site Greenwire reporting, despite Napolitano's assurances about EPA rigor, that BP, free to choose any approved dispersant, went with Corexit. That's Corexit with an X, despite the fact that most other approved dispersants were both less toxic and more effective on southern Louisiana crude, 100% effective in some cases compared to about 60% for Corexit. The Transocean, operator of the rig, announcing Friday $1 billion in dividends for its investors, and now being sued by shareholders who claim that the company knew about failures by the blowout preventer prior to last month's failure, but covered them up. One whistleblower telling 60 Minutes that a chunk of this blowout preventer's rubber seal was sheared off in an accident 4 weeks before the blowout, and nothing was done about it. As we mentioned, the man in charge of offshore leasing at MMS, the Minerals Management Service, Chris Owens, we learned today submitting his resignation just after the explosion. Owens appointed to the post by then MMS Director Johnny Burton in 2007, promoted by Burton, a Wyoming oil acquaintance of Vice President Cheney, despite or because of the fact that on his watch, MMS leases let oil companies walk off with $10 billion in taxpayer money. We're now joined by Congressman Ed Markey, the Democrat of Massachusetts, chairman of the House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. Great. Thanks for your time tonight, Congressman.
Thank you for having me.
We asked BP on Friday whether they had the backup devices that are called acoustic switches on the 2 relief wells that they were putting into that site, and whether the blowout preventers on those rigs had been checked out by government regulators so the same thing didn't happen all over again. And the answer we got from BP was, we don't know. How are you doing getting your information from them?
Well, as we know, BP certified last summer that they could handle a spill 50 times greater than the one they claim is happening right now. And so, in answer to your question, I think it's pretty clear they're making it up. When you talk about shooting golf balls down to clog up this hole, when you talk about nylons and hair to sop up the oil, it's pretty clear that they spent a lot of money on new drills, but they didn't spend a lot of money in dealing with what happens if those drills don't work.
This issue of the dispersants, why is the EPA letting BP choose dispersants made by a company that they have a tie to, and obviously that presents at least the appearance of a conflict of interest, especially when the local officials are having their questions about the efficacy and the safety of the dispersant?
Well, I wrote a letter to the EPA today on the issue of the dispersants. We have to learn a lot more about this science experiment which is being conducted in the Gulf of Mexico. We are in all new territory, and I think that the American people have to know a lot more about it, and I'm going to make sure that Congress gets the answers early on before we go too far down this track of shooting these chemicals into the water, which could have long-term catastrophic consequences that invoke the law of unintended consequences. We just don't know.
Congressman Markey, why exactly do we need BP to get anything done here? Seems like they've done enough. Why not just bring in people to estimate the size and the location of the plumes and attend to them and then hand BP a bill afterwards? Why is BP running this show?
My opinion, I think that we should have independent people in. I think that there are experts from Woods Hole to MIT out to Caltech down in the universities in the Gulf region who are ready, willing, and able to move in and give the long-term scientific expertise to solve these problems. But so far, BP is pretending that this is just one big privatized program that doesn't need outside help. But I think the evidence is clear that they don't know what they're doing. And I think the quicker we get in the independent scientists is the quicker we're going to bring an end to this catastrophe.
We're assuming it can't be a coincidence that Mr. Owens is out, and we find out about this now, and then he resigned right after the explosion on this rig. He'd been promoted after he told investigators he did not remember the oil companies telling, or themselves telling him about the $10 billion mistake, the taxpayer money that they got in addition to what they deserved. Why was he, in your opinion, still running things a year and a half after the president had put in former Senator Salazar to clean things up at that administration?
Well, a lot of the decisions, as you're pointing out, were made during the Bush administration or during the time that President Obama was putting his own people over there right up through last July. So unfortunately, we're still living with the consequences of decisions that were made by Bush appointees right up through the middle of last year when President Obama was finally able to put his own people in. And his resignation is just an indication of how cozy the cooperation was between the Bush administration and the oil industry.
Congressman Ed Markey, the Democrat of Massachusetts, great thanks for your time tonight. Good luck as you pursue this, sir.
Thank you, sir.